The desert sun beat down on Camp Pendleton with relentless intensity as Corporal Rhiannon Vex stepped off the transport vehicle, her rifle case slung across her shoulders. The case itself drew immediate attention, not because of its tactical design, but because of the hand-painted pink roses that wound across its surface in delicate, intricate patterns. She had known this moment would come, the inevitable stares and whispers that followed her to every new assignment. Sergeant Brock Dunham was the first to vocalize what everyone else was thinking. He stood near the barracks entrance, arms crossed over his broad chest, his weathered face twisted into a smirk. "That's what we're getting now," he called out to the small group of Marines gathered nearby. "They're sending us florists instead of shooters." The laughter that erupted was sharp and immediate. Rhiannon kept her expression neutral, her pale green eyes fixed straight ahead as she continued toward the administrative building. She had heard variations of this greeting at 3 previous bases. The script never changed much, only the faces and the specific insults. Lance Corporal Derek Mathers jogged up beside her, his curiosity apparently outweighing whatever discretion he might have possessed. "Is that really your service rifle?" he asked, his voice carrying across the dusty courtyard. "Or is that for, like, a charity event or something?" Rhiannon adjusted the strap on her shoulder without breaking stride. "It's my rifle," she replied simply. "Standard issue M40A6, custom paint job." Mathers laughed, a sound that held more bewilderment than genuine humor. "You know we're actually going downrange, right? This isn't some recruiting poster shoot. We're talking real combat situations here." She finally stopped and turned to face him, her movements deliberate and calm. "I'm aware of the assignment, Lance Corporal. That's why I requested the transfer. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of courage where you're from, or perhaps you've seen how people are judged before they ever get a chance to prove themselves." The administrative building offered temporary refuge from scrutiny. Staff Sergeant Helena Cortez sat behind the intake desk, her dark eyes taking in Rhiannon's appearance with a more measured assessment than the men outside had offered. "Corporal Vex," she said, checking her roster. "You're with 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, Scout Sniper Attachment." Rhiannon nodded, setting her rifle case carefully on the floor beside her. "Reporting as ordered, Staff Sergeant." Cortez leaned back in her chair, studying the younger woman with an expression that remained professionally neutral but held an undercurrent of something else, perhaps concern or maybe just weariness. "You should know that 3rd Platoon has one of the highest operational tempos in the battalion," she said. "The men you'll be working with have been together for 2 years. They've been through 3 major deployments together. They're not particularly welcoming to outsiders, and they're especially skeptical about female attachments to combat units." "I understand," Staff Sergeant Rhiannon replied. "Do you?" Cortez asked, her tone sharpening slightly. "Because what happened outside just now, that's going to be every single day until you either prove yourself or wash out. And the proving yourself part, that's going to require a higher standard than any of the men face. Fair or not, that's the reality." Rhiannon met her gaze steadily. "I've operated under those conditions before, Staff Sergeant. I'm prepared for it." Cortez held her stare for another moment before nodding slowly and sliding a folder across the desk. "Your bunk assignment is in there, along with your training schedule. You'll meet with Lieutenant Colonel Archer tomorrow at 0600. He's the one who approved your transfer, so he'll want to assess you personally before assigning you to any operational teams." As Rhiannon left the building, rifle case once again secured across her shoulders, she could see that word had spread quickly. More Marines had gathered near the barracks, their conversations pausing as she approached. She recognized the pattern, the way groups of men would cluster and observe, forming judgments before she had fired a single round or completed a single mission with them. Sergeant Dunham had positioned himself directly in her path, flanked now by 2 other Marines who looked equally skeptical of her presence. "We're running the range tomorrow morning," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I want to see what you can actually do with that ridiculous weapon of yours." If you can't group under 6 inches at 300 meters, I'm recommending they reassign you to logistics where you belong. Rhiannon stopped in front of him, her petite frame dwarfed by his bulk, but her posture remaining perfectly composed. I'll be at the range, Sergeant. What time should I report? Off of 100, he replied. And Corporal, leave the art project at home. Bring a real rifle if you have one. This is a real rifle, Sergeant, she said quietly. You'll see that tomorrow. The barracks were exactly what she had expected. A long, narrow building with rows of metal bunks and footlockers, everything painted in the same dull gray that seemed to define military architecture. Her assigned bunk was at the far end, isolated from the main group. Another familiar pattern, the physical manifestation of her status as an outsider. The pre-dawn darkness offered little comfort as Rhiannon made her way to the rifle range. She had barely slept, not from nerves, but from the constant noise of Marines coming and going throughout the night, their conversations deliberately loud whenever they passed her bunk. Someone had left a bouquet of artificial flowers on her footlocker during the night, the plastic petals garish in the dim emergency lighting. She had simply placed them aside without comment. The range was already active when she arrived, floodlights illuminating the firing positions in harsh white light. Sergeant Dunham stood at the center lane, surrounded by at least a dozen other Marines who had apparently decided that her qualification shoot was worth waking up early to witness. The anticipation of her failure hung in the air like morning mist. Right on time, Dunham said, checking his watch with exaggerated precision. I almost thought you'd reconsidered. Lots of female Marines find that scout sniper work isn't quite what they imagined once they actually have to perform. Rhiannon set her rifle case down on the designated bench and began methodically unpacking her weapon. The pink roses seemed to glow under the floodlights, each petal rendered in careful detail against the matte black finish of the stock. She had painted them herself during her first deployment, during the long hours between missions when most Marines wrote letters home or played cards. The roses represented something personal, something that reminded her she could be both deadly and feminine, both a warrior and a woman. That thing is a disgrace to the uniform, muttered Corporal Hayes from somewhere behind her. He was one of Dunham's regular shadows, a stocky man with a perpetual sneer. My daughter has a toy rifle that looks more tactical than that. Rhiannon continued her inspection without responding. She checked the bolt action, examined the scope mounting, ran her fingers along the barrel to verify the surface condition. Every movement was deliberate and professional, the ritual of a shooter who understood that her weapon was an extension of herself. You've got 20 rounds to prove you belong here, Dunham announced, his voice taking on the formal tone of an evaluator. 300-meter targets, standing and prone positions. Standard scout, sniper qualification parameters. Failed to meet minimum standards, and I'm personally requesting your transfer to a non-combat role. Understood, Sergeant, Rhiannon replied. She moved to the firing line, settling into her first position with practiced ease. The gathered Marines watched with barely concealed skepticism as she chambered her first round. Someone in the back made a joke about whether the pink paint added any ballistic advantage. Laughter rippled through the group, but it died quickly as Rhiannon steadied her breathing and found her natural point of aim. The first shot broke clean and true, the rifle's report sharp in the morning air. Through the spotting scope, the range officer called out the impact. Center mass, he said, his tone neutral but carrying a hint of surprise. Rhiannon cycled the bolt and fired again. And again. Each shot followed the same rhythm. Breath control, trigger press, follow-throw. The rifle felt perfect in her hands, the balance and weight as familiar as her own heartbeat. The roses on the stock weren't just decoration. They were a reminder of every doubter she had ever faced, every man who had assumed that femininity and lethality were somehow mutually exclusive. By her 10th shot, the mocking comments had ceased entirely. The Marines watching had gone quiet, their attention focused on the target downrange, where Rhiannon's rounds were grouping with mechanical precision. Even Dunham had stopped making snide remarks, his arms still crossed, but his expression shifting from contempt to grudging attention. She completed the standing portion of the qualification without a single round outside the designated scoring ring. The transition to prone position was smooth and efficient, her body settling into the dirt with the comfort of someone who had spent countless hours in exactly this position across a dozen different continents. The range officer continued calling her shots, his voice growing more animated with each impact. "That's 20 for 20 in the 9 and 10 ring," he announced as she fired her final round. "Perfect score, Sergeant Dunham." Dunham walked to the spotting scope and looked for himself, his jaw working as if he wanted to speak but couldn't quite find the words. The grouping was impossibly tight, the bullet holes forming a cluster no larger than a silver dollar at 300 meters. It was the kind of performance that even experienced scout snipers struggled to achieve consistently. Rhiannon stood and cleared her weapon, then began the process of packing her rifle away with the same methodical care she had shown in setting up. The silence around her felt different now, not mocking but uncertain. She had passed their test, exceeded it even, but she could sense that it wouldn't be enough. One good range session wouldn't erase their prejudices or convince them that she belonged among them. Lance Corporal Mathers approached cautiously, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine curiosity. "Where did you train?" he asked. "That's some of the tightest grouping I've ever seen at 300. Quantico initially," Rhiannon replied, "then advanced training at several other locations. I've been shooting competitively since I was 12 years old." Dunham overheard the exchange and stepped closer, his expression still guarded but no longer openly hostile. "Competitively," he repeated, "like target shooting competitions?" "Among other things," she confirmed. "Well," he said slowly, as if each word required careful consideration, "I suppose you can shoot straight. That's more than some people expected. But qualification scores on a flat range don't mean much when you're dealing with real combat conditions, variable wind, moving targets, return fire. We'll see how you perform when the pressure's actually on." Rhiannon secured the last strap on her rifle case and met his gaze directly. "I look forward to the opportunity to prove myself in those conditions, Sergeant." As the group began to disperse, she caught fragments of their conversations. Some remained skeptical, arguing that one good shoot didn't mean anything substantial. Others seemed more thoughtful, reconsidering their initial assessments. But all of them, she noticed, looked at her differently now. The ridicule had diminished, replaced by a wary respect that acknowledged her competence even if they weren't ready to fully accept her presence. Lieutenant Colonel Archer's office was sparse and utilitarian, decorated only with commendations and unit photographs that chronicled decades of Marine Corps service. He sat behind his desk reviewing a thick file folder, his gray hair cut to regulation length and his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts. Rhiannon stood at attention before him, waiting for permission to speak or sit. "At ease, Corporal," Archer said without looking up from the folder. "Take a seat." She settled into the metal chair across from his desk, her posture remaining military straight despite the invitation to relax. The file he was reading, she realized, was hers. She could see her service photograph clipped to the inside cover, along with what appeared to be extensive documentation beneath it. "Your record is remarkable," Archer said finally, closing the folder and meeting her eyes. "Top of your class at Quantico. Expert marksman qualification every single cycle. Multiple commendations for performance under fire during your deployment to Kandahar. And yet," he paused, tapping the folder with one finger, "you've been transferred 4 times in 3 years. Each transfer requested by your commanding officer, citing unit cohesion issues." Rhiannon kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir." The cohesion issues stemmed primarily from other Marines' inability to accept a female sniper in their units, not from any deficiency in my performance. "I'm aware," Archer replied. "I've read the actual reports, not just the sanitized versions that went into your official file. Sergeant Major Chun at your last posting wrote that you were the most naturally gifted shooter he'd encountered in 26 years of service, but that the unit's senior enlisted leadership had made it clear they would make your continued presence untenable. That's an accurate assessment, sir." Archer leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that felt different from the scrutiny she had faced on the range. This wasn't skepticism or prejudice. This was evaluation by someone who actually understood what he was looking at. I requested your transfer here because 3rd Battalion needs talented scout snipers, and I don't particularly care about the politics that drive other commanders' decisions. But I need to know if you're prepared for what that means. Sir? Rhiannon asked. It means I'm not going to protect you from the inevitable harassment and hostility, he explained bluntly. I'm not going to give you special treatment or intervene every time some knuckle-dragger makes an inappropriate comment. You're going to have to earn your place here the same way every other Marine does, through demonstrated competence and proven performance. Can you handle that? I've been handling exactly that for 3 years, sir, she replied. I'm not asking for protection or special treatment. I'm asking for the opportunity to do my job. Good, Archer said, because we're deploying to Syria in 6 weeks, and I need every shooter I can get. You'll be integrated into Sergeant Dunham's scout sniper team. He's not happy about it, but he's professional enough to give you a fair evaluation in the field. Prove yourself there, and the rest will follow. The integration into Dunham's team began that afternoon with a tactical movement exercise through the desert terrain surrounding Camp Pendleton. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made every piece of gear feel twice as heavy and turned simple breathing into conscious effort. Rhiannon moved with the foreman team, maintaining her position in the formation while carrying the full combat load expected of a scout sniper. Dunham set a punishing pace, pushing hard over rocky ground and through sandy washes that sucked at their boots. She understood what he was doing, testing her physical endurance and hoping she would fall behind or request a break. The other Marines in the team, Corporal Hayes and Lance Corporals Mathers and Torres, watched her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. After 2 hours of continuous movement, they reached a designated observation point overlooking a mock enemy position. Dunham called a halt and gestured for Rhiannon to set up her position. Let's see how you do with a real tactical scenario, he said. Range to target is approximately 800 meters. Wind from the southwest at 15 knots with gusts up to 20. Identify and engage priority targets. Rhiannon unslung her rifle and moved into position, her movements efficient despite her fatigue. She established a stable shooting platform using her pack and began her assessment of the range. Through her scope, she could see the mock enemy position clearly. Mannequin targets positioned at various distances and angles, some partially concealed behind berms or simulated structures. Torres was assigned as her spotter, a role he approached with obvious reluctance. He settled beside her with his spotting scope, his body language broadcasting his skepticism. Wind call is your responsibility, he said flatly. I'm just here to confirm hits. Rhiannon ignored his tone and focused on her work. She began calling out her observations, identifying targets by priority based on their tactical significance. The vehicle-mounted weapon system would be her first target, followed by the elevated position that provided overwatch of the approach routes. Torres confirmed her assessments with minimal commentary, his professional training overriding his personal feelings. When she fired her first shot, the rifle's report echoed across the desert landscape. Torres tracked the bullet's impact through his scope. Hit, he confirmed. Center mass on the primary target. She worked through her engagement sequence methodically, adjusting for wind and elevation with each shot. The muscle memory of thousands of hours of training took over, her body executing the fundamentals with unconscious precision. Breath control, trigger press, follow-through. The rhythm was meditative, everything else falling away until there was only the rifle, the target, and the space between them. By the time she had engaged all priority targets, Torres had gone quiet. His confirmations had become more animated, his skepticism gradually replaced by professional respect for what he was witnessing. When she cleared her weapon and began packing up, he finally spoke with something approaching genuine curiosity. Where exactly did you deploy before this? He asked, because that's not standard sniper school performance. That's something else entirely. Various locations, Rhiannon replied carefully. Mostly classified operations. Dunham had been observing from a position several meters away, and now he approached with an expression that remained guarded, but had lost some of its earlier hostility. "Your fundamentals are solid," he admitted grudgingly. "But combat's different. Real targets shoot back, and the pressure changes everything. We'll see how you perform when the stakes are actual lives instead of mannequins." "I understand, Sergeant," she replied simply. The movement back to base was quieter than the approach had been. The team still maintained tactical spacing and proper formation, but the dynamic had shifted subtly. Mathers and Torres occasionally glanced in her direction, their expressions thoughtful rather than dismissive. Hayes remained openly hostile, but even he had stopped making derogatory comments about her rifle or her presence. The weeks before deployment passed in a blur of training exercises and equipment preparations. Rhiannon found herself existing in a strange liminal space within the unit, neither fully accepted nor completely rejected. Her performance continued to exceed expectations at every range session and tactical drill, yet the social barriers remained firmly in place. The other Marines would work with her professionally during operations, but the moment training concluded, she became invisible again. The barracks had become particularly uncomfortable. Hayes had assumed the role of primary antagonist, making sure that her presence remained contentious. He organized the other Marines to ensure she was excluded from informal gatherings, spoke over her during briefings, and made subtle comments designed to undermine her confidence without crossing into territory that would warrant official discipline. One evening, as she sat on her bunk cleaning her rifle, Hayes approached with two other Marines she didn't know well. They positioned themselves in a semicircle around her space, their body language deliberately intimidating. "We've been talking," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the barracks so others could hear. "And we think it's only fair to let you know that when we deploy, nobody's watching your back. You want to play soldier with that toy rifle, that's your business. But don't expect the rest of us to risk our lives covering for you when things go sideways." Rhiannon continued working the cleaning rod through her rifle's barrel, not looking up. "I've never asked anyone to cover for me, Corporal. I handle my own responsibilities. That's the thing, though," Hayes continued, warming to his theme. "In a real firefight, everyone's responsible for everyone else. And none of us trust you to hold your end when the bullets start flying. All the perfect range scores in the world don't mean anything when someone's actually shooting back. And I suppose we'll find out when we deploy, won't we?" Rhiannon replied calmly, finally meeting his eyes. "Until then, I'd appreciate it if you'd step back and let me finish my maintenance." Hayes seemed prepared to escalate further, but Sergeant Dunham's voice cut through the tension from the far end of the barracks. "Hayes, Torres outside. Now." The three Marines exchanged glances before complying, leaving Rhiannon alone with her rifle and her thoughts. The training intensified as deployment approached. The battalion conducted a full mission rehearsal exercise that lasted 72 hours, simulating the conditions they would face in Syria. Rhiannon's team was assigned to provide overwatch for a convoy movement through hostile territory, a role that required constant vigilance and the ability to engage threats at extended ranges. They established their position on a ridgeline overlooking the mock convoy route 2 hours before dawn. The desert cold seeped through their gear as they waited, the temperature dropping to near freezing before the sun finally began its ascent. Rhiannon occupied the primary shooter position, with Torres spotting and Dunham coordinating with the convoy leadership through encrypted radio. The first simulated contact came at 0600, opposition forces attempting to ambush the convoy from concealed positions along the route. Rhiannon identified the threats through her scope and began engaging, her shots timed to the rhythm of the convoy's movement. The exercise controllers confirmed her hits through the radio network, their voices professional but carrying notes of surprise at her speed and accuracy. "Multiple dismounts, 300 meters northwest," Torres called out, tracking movement through his spotting scope. "Looks like they're trying to flank the convoy's rear element." Rhiannon shifted her aim, found her targets, and began engaging the new threat. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with each shot, the pink roses on the stock a strange counterpoint to the violence she was simulating. 4 rounds for confirmed hits. The flanking attempt collapsed before it could develop into a serious threat. The exercise continued for hours, wave after wave of simulated attacks that tested the team's endurance and coordination. Rhiannon lost track of how many engagements she participated in, her world narrowing to the view through her scope and Torres's quiet updates beside her. Her shooting remained consistent even as fatigue began to set in, the fundamentals so deeply ingrained that her body executed them automatically. When the exercise finally concluded, the convoy had sustained 0 casualties and minimal damage. The after-action review was conducted in a large tent where all the participating units gathered to discuss performance and lessons learned. The operations officer, Major Reeves, stood at the front with a tablet displaying engagement statistics. I want to specifically highlight the performance of 3rd Platoon's Scout Sniper team, Reeves announced, his voice carrying across the assembled Marines. Corporal Vex achieved a 97% hit rate across 43 engagements, many of which were at ranges exceeding standard engagement parameters. Her Overwatch position was directly responsible for preventing what would have been catastrophic losses to the convoy. The tent went quiet. Marines who had spent weeks dismissing Rhiannon's capabilities now stared at her with expressions ranging from surprise to reassessment. Even Hayes, sitting several rows ahead, had turned to look back at her, his face unreadable. Dunham stood from his position and addressed the group. Corporal Vex performed exceptionally during this exercise, but I want to emphasize that it was a team effort. Torres's spotting was precise. Our communication with convoy leadership was seamless, and our position selection gave us optimal fields of fire. That's how Scout Sniper teams are supposed to operate. It was a fair assessment, but Rhiannon noticed something in how he delivered it. He wasn't diminishing her contribution, but rather placing it in proper context. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged her as a legitimate member of his team, rather than an unwanted addition he was forced to tolerate. After the briefing, several Marines approached her with questions about her shooting techniques and equipment setup. The conversations were professional rather than friendly, but they represented a significant shift from the open hostility she had faced upon arrival. Even Mathers, who had been one of the first to mock her pink rifle, engaged her in a serious discussion about wind-reading techniques. But as she walked back to the barracks that evening, she overheard a conversation that reminded her how fragile this progress really was. Hayes was talking to a group of Marines from another platoon, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry. "Sure, she can shoot paper targets and mannequins," he was saying, "but nobody's seen her perform under actual fire. For all we know, she'll freeze up the first time someone shoots back. I'm telling you, when we get to Syria, that's when we'll see what she's really made of. And I'm betting she won't last a week before they ship her back stateside." The deployment to Syria came with little fanfare. The battalion loaded on a transport aircraft in the dead of night, their gear packed tight and their expressions reflecting the weight of what awaited them. Rhiannon sat wedged between equipment pallets, her rifle case secure beside her, watching the other Marines settle into the uncomfortable silence that preceded combat deployments. Some slept, others stared at nothing, and a few checked and rechecked their equipment with nervous energy. The forward operating base was a collection of fortified structures and temporary buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and guard towers. Dust covered everything, fine and persistent, working its way into gear and lungs with equal efficiency. The heat was overwhelming even at night, and the constant presence of armed sentries reminded everyone that this was not a training exercise. 3rd Platoon was assigned to a compound on the eastern perimeter, close enough to the main base to receive support, but isolated enough to maintain operational security for their Scout Sniper missions. Dunham gathered the team in their Tactical Operations Center, a reinforced room with maps covering every wall and radio equipment humming in the corner. "Our primary mission is reconnaissance and interdiction along Highway 7, he explained, pointing to a red line on the map that cut through hostile territory. "Intelligence indicates that enemy forces are using this route to move weapons and personnel between strongholds. We'll be conducting observation missions to identify high-value targets and disrupt their logistics operations." Rhiannon studied the map carefully, noting the terrain features and potential observation positions. The highway ran through a valley with elevated positions on both sides, ideal for long-range engagement, but also vulnerable to counterattack if their position was compromised. Rules of engagement are strict, Dunham continued. Positive identification required before any shot. We're not here to rack up body counts. We're here to eliminate specific threats that have been verified through multiple intelligence sources. Everyone clear? The team acknowledged their understanding. Torres was assigned as Rhiannon's primary spotter, a pairing that had developed into an efficient working relationship despite his initial reluctance. Mathers and Hayes would rotate between security and secondary observation duties. Their first mission launched 48 hours after arrival. They moved out at dusk, loaded into armored vehicles that carried them to a drop-off point several kilometers from their target observation post. From there, they moved on foot through darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain. The weight of Rhiannon's full combat load pressed down on her shoulders, but she maintained pace with the others, her breathing controlled and her focus absolute. The observation post was a natural rock formation that provided excellent concealment and overlook of the highway below. They arrived 3 hours before dawn and immediately began establishing their position. Rhiannon set up her rifle with methodical precision, testing her fields of fire and marking range cards for key terrain features. Torres positioned himself beside her with a spotting scope, while Dunham coordinated with battalion headquarters through encrypted communications. The sun rose slowly, burning away the cool darkness and replacing it with brutal heat. They lay motionless in their positions, scanning the highway and surrounding area for any sign of enemy activity. Hours passed with nothing but occasional civilian traffic, vehicles moving cautiously along the damaged roadway. "We've got movement," Torres said quietly around midday. 3 vehicles, military pattern, approaching from the north. Range approximately 2,000 meters. Rhiannon shifted slightly, bringing her scope to bear on the approaching convoy. Through the heat shimmer, she could make out the vehicles clearly. 2 technical trucks mounted with heavy weapons and 1 larger transport vehicle. The convoy moved at moderate speed, clearly confident in their control of this section of highway. "Stand by for identification," Dunham said into his radio, relaying information to the Tactical Operations Center. He was describing the vehicles, their configuration, and their direction of travel. The response came back quickly. Intelligence had been tracking this specific convoy, and it was confirmed to be transporting weapons for enemy forces operating in the region. "You are clear to engage priority targets," came the authorization through Dunham's earpiece. His expression remained neutral as he relayed the order to Rhiannon. "You have authorization to engage the vehicle-mounted weapon systems. 2 shots, then we relocate immediately." Rhiannon settled into her shooting position, her body finding the stable platform she had practiced thousands of times. The range was significant, 2,000 meters with variable wind conditions and heat distortion complicating the ballistics. She began her calculations, factoring in every variable she could measure or estimate. "Winds gusty," Torres observed, 3 to 5 miles per hour from the west, but it's shifting. You'll need to time your shot between gusts. She watched the mirage through her scope, reading the heat shimmer the way other people read text. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping as she entered the focus state where nothing existed except the rifle, the target, and the physics that connected them. The lead vehicle's gunner was visible now, standing behind the mounted weapon and scanning the surrounding terrain. The first shot broke during a lull in the wind, the rifle's report sharp against the desert silence. Rhiannon followed through, watching the bullet's trajectory through her scope. The impact came 2.3 seconds later, and the gunner collapsed backward, the heavy weapon swinging unmanned on its mount. "Target down," Torres confirmed. The convoy's reacting, second vehicle accelerating. Rhiannon had already cycled the bolt and was tracking the second vehicle. This shot was more difficult, the target now moving a higher speed and the other vehicles creating complications for her line of sight. She led the target, adjusting for the movement and the continuing wind conditions. The second shot felt perfect the moment it left the barrel. "Second target down," Torres said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. Both heavy weapons neutralized. Dunham was already breaking down his equipment. "Pack up, we're moving. They'll have our position identified soon, and we need to be gone before they can respond." The team collapsed their observation post with practiced efficiency, erasing any obvious signs of their presence and moving quickly away from the position. They were a kilometer away when they heard the sound of mortars impacting the ridgeline they had just vacated. The enemy's response was aggressive, but too late, their rounds exploding harmlessly against empty rocks. Back at the forward operating base, the after-action review was brief but significant. Major Reeves himself attended, along with the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Archer. They reviewed the drone footage that had captured Rhiannon's engagement, watching the replays of both shots connecting at extreme range against moving targets in challenging conditions. The weeks that followed established a rhythm of operations that tested the team's endurance and cohesion. They conducted observation missions every 3 to 4 days, spending long hours in concealed positions watching enemy movement patterns and engaging authorized targets. Rhiannon's performance remained consistently exceptional, her shots connecting with precision that drew increasing attention from battalion leadership. But success in combat did not translate to acceptance in the barracks. Hayes continued his campaign of isolation and subtle harassment, though his tactics had evolved to become more sophisticated. He couldn't criticize her shooting anymore, so instead he questioned her judgment, her tactical decisions, and her right to be there at all. The arguments always happened when officers weren't present, and always stopped just short of anything that could be formally reported. "You know what I heard from the intelligence section?" Hayes said one evening as several Marines gathered for evening chow. "They say half the targets we've been engaging weren't actually high-value assets. Just regular fighters that command wanted eliminated to pad their statistics. And our little sharpshooter here is so eager to prove herself that she'll shoot anyone they point her at." Rhiannon continued eating without responding. She had learned that engaging with Hayes only encouraged him to escalate. But Torres, sitting across from her, set down his fork with deliberate care. "That's a lie and you know it," Torres said, his voice hard. "Every target we've engaged has been properly authorized through intelligence channels. We've seen the verification ourselves. So why don't you quit running your mouth about things you don't understand?" Hayes turned his attention to Torres with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, so now you're defending her? That's interesting. I remember when you were one of the first people saying she didn't belong here." "People can change their minds when the evidence contradicts their assumptions," Torres replied. "Unlike some people who are too stubborn to admit when they're wrong." The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Other Marines were watching now, some with interest and others with discomfort. Rhiannon felt the weight of their attention, but kept her focus on her meal, refusing to be drawn into the confrontation. Sergeant Dunham's entrance defused the immediate situation. He surveyed the room with the expression of someone who had walked into countless similar scenes and knew exactly what was happening. "Hayes, you're on guard duty tonight. North Tower, 1800 to midnight. Torres, you'll relieve him at midnight. Everyone else, finish eating and get ready for tomorrow's briefing at off of 100. The next mission came with higher stakes and greater complexity. Intelligence had identified a high-value target traveling through their area of operations, an enemy commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The window for engagement would be narrow, and the shot would be at extreme range across difficult terrain. Target will be moving in a convoy of 4 vehicles, Dunham explained during the mission briefing. Our intelligence indicates he'll be in the second vehicle, but we won't have positive identification until they're in the kill zone. Estimated range to engagement area is 2,800 meters from our observation post. Wind conditions are expected to be variable and challenging. 2,800 meters was beyond the effective range for most snipers, requiring not just skill, but an intimate understanding of ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and the specific characteristics of the rifle and ammunition. Rhiannon had made shots at that distance before, but never in combat conditions and never with such a narrow window of opportunity. The team moved into position under cover of darkness, establishing themselves on a ridgeline that overlooked a stretch of highway known to be used by enemy forces. The position was exposed, with limited concealment and difficult escape routes if they were detected. But it provided the only viable angle for the required engagement. They waited for 6 hours. The sun climbed higher, the heat building until the rock around them was too hot to touch with bare skin. Rhiannon remained motionless in her shooting position, conserving her energy while maintaining her focus. Torres lay beside her with the spotting scope, scanning the highway and monitoring the environmental conditions. Convoy approaching, Torres said quietly. 4 vehicles, military configuration, matching intelligence profile. Range 2,900 meters and closing. Rhiannon watched through her scope as the vehicles came into view. The heat shimmer was severe at this range, the images wavering and distorting in the rising air. She began her mental calculations, factoring in the range, the elevation difference, the estimated wind at various points along the bullet's trajectory. Second vehicle is slowing, Torres observed. Passenger side, rear door opening. Standby for identification. Through her scope, Rhiannon could see a figure emerging from the vehicle. He was wearing traditional clothing rather than military gear, but he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. 2 armed guards flanked him, their body language protective and alert. Dunham was receiving confirmation through his radio, his expression tense as he processed the intelligence. "That's our target," he said finally. "Positive identification confirmed. You are cleared to engage." The wind was problematic, gusting unpredictably across the valley. Rhiannon watched the mirage, reading the patterns and waiting for a moment of relative stability. The target was moving now, walking toward the front vehicle where other figures were gathered. Her window was closing rapidly. "Wind's dropping," Torres said. "You've got maybe 10 seconds of stable conditions." Rhiannon's breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure while her body settled into absolute stillness. The rifle was an extension of her will, every component aligned toward a single purpose. She could feel the wind on her face, the sun's heat radiating from the rocks, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat counting down the seconds. The shot broke clean, the rifle's recoil absorbed by her stable position. The report echoed across the valley as the bullet began its journey through nearly 3,000 meters of air. Time seemed to stretch as she maintained her follow-through, watching through the scope as the bullet covered the distance. The impact was visible even at that range, the target collapsing as his guards rushed to his position. Confusion rippled through the convoy, vehicles accelerating and armed personnel scanning the surrounding terrain for the source of the attack. "Direct hit," Torres confirmed, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of awe. "Target down. That was a hell of a shot." "Pack up," Dunham ordered. "We need to be moving in 90 seconds." They collapsed their position and began their exfiltration, moving quickly through the rocky terrain toward their extraction point. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the enemy response, vehicles racing up access roads and weapons fire as they searched for their hidden attackers. But the team was already gone, disappearing into the landscape like ghosts. The intelligence value of the operation was immediately recognized at the battalion level. The enemy commander had been a primary target for months, and his elimination disrupted coordination across multiple enemy cells. Rhiannon's shot at 2,800 meters under challenging conditions was documented and added to the mission report with specific commendation. The successful elimination of the enemy commander brought unwanted attention along with the commendations. Word spread through the battalion about the exceptional shot, and Marines who had never spoken to Rhiannon suddenly wanted to know details about her equipment, her training, and her techniques. She answered their questions with professional courtesy, but the increased visibility also intensified the scrutiny from those who remained hostile to her presence. Hayes escalated his campaign to a new level. He began spreading rumors that Rhiannon's success was exaggerated, that the shots attributed to her were actually luck or had been taken by other members of the team. When confronted by Torres about the lies, Hayes simply shrugged and suggested that if Rhiannon wanted to prove herself, she should do something truly extraordinary rather than relying on favorable mission reports. The operation's tempo increased as intelligence identified a surge in enemy activity throughout the region. 3rd Platoon conducted back-to-back missions with minimal rest between deployments, the strain showing in everyone's faces and shortened tempers. Rhiannon maintained her performance standards despite the exhaustion, but she could feel the weight of constant vigilance beginning to accumulate. During one mission, they established an observation post overlooking a suspected enemy staging area. The position required them to remain in place for 36 hours, maintaining constant surveillance while living on minimal rations and water. The summer heat was relentless, the temperature inside their concealed position climbing past 120 degrees during the afternoon hours. Mathers was on security rotation when he spotted movement in an unexpected location. "We got dismounts approaching from the east," he whispered urgently. "At least 8 fighters, heavily armed, moving directly toward our position." Dunham assessed the situation quickly. They were compromised, their positions somehow identified by enemy forces who were now closing in with clear hostile intent. The nearest friendly units were too far away to provide immediate support, and their exfiltration route would take them directly into the approaching enemy force. "We need to break contact and move now," Dunham said, beginning to pack essential gear. "Leave anything that's not critical. Vex, you'll provide rear security while we displace. Engage any targets that threaten the team's movement." Rhiannon shifted her position to cover their withdrawal route, her rifle trained on the approaching enemy fighters. Through her scope, she could see them moving with tactical proficiency, using cover and maintaining good spacing. These weren't amateurs. They were trained fighters who understood small unit tactics. The team began their withdrawal, moving quickly but carefully through the rocky terrain. Rhiannon remained in position, her rifle tracking the enemy movement and her finger resting on the trigger. The first fighter came into the open, scanning the area where the observation post had been. She made the decision in a fraction of a second, her shot breaking clean and dropping the fighter before he could alert the others. "Contact rear," she said quietly into her radio. "One down," continuing to observe. The other fighters reacted immediately, taking cover and returning fire toward her position. Rounds cracked past her, impacting the rocks around her with sharp reports. Rhiannon remained calm, identifying targets and engaging with methodical precision. 2 more shots, 2 more fighters down. The survivors went to ground, their advance halted by her accurate fire. "Vex, displace now," Dunham ordered through the radio. "We got your exit route covered." Rhiannon fired one more round to keep the enemy suppressed, then broke from her position and moved rapidly toward the team's rally point. Bullets followed her, close enough that she could hear their passage through the air. She ran in short bursts, using available cover and changing direction unpredictably. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her mind remained focused on the terrain and the team's location ahead. She reached the rally point where Torres and Mathers had established a hasty defensive position. They provided covering fire as she dove into cover beside them, her breathing heavy but controlled. Dunham was already coordinating with Battalion for emergency extraction, his voice urgent but professional as he described their situation. The firefight continued for another 20 minutes, the enemy attempting to flank their position while the team held them back with precise defensive fire. Rhiannon contributed to the defense, engaging targets as they appeared and forcing the enemy to remain cautious. The arrival of attack helicopters finally broke the enemy's assault, the heavy weapons fire scattering the surviving fighters and allowing the team to reach their extraction point. Back at the forward operating base, the team underwent immediate debriefing while medical personnel checked them for injuries. Rhiannon had sustained a minor shrapnel wound to her left arm from a near miss, but otherwise the team had emerged intact. The debriefing officer documented the engagement in detail, paying particular attention to Rhiannon's rear security actions that had prevented the team from being overrun. That evening, as exhaustion finally caught up with her, Rhiannon sat alone outside the barracks cleaning her rifle. The pink roses on the stalk were dulled by dust and wear, but they remained visible, a reminder of who she was beneath the combat gear and the growing reputation. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Dunham standing nearby. "That was solid work today," he said without preamble. "Your rear security actions probably saved lives. The team owes you for that." "Just doing my job, Sergeant," Rhiannon replied. Dunham nodded slowly, studying her for a moment before continuing. "I'll be honest with you, Corporal. When you first arrived, I thought you were going to be a liability. I believed all the usual assumptions about female Marines in combat roles. Thought you'd fold under pressure or become a distraction for the team. I was wrong about that." Rhiannon looked up from her rifle, meeting his eyes directly. "I appreciate you saying that, Sergeant. But here's the thing," Dunham continued. "There are still people in this unit, in this battalion, who are never going to accept you regardless of what you accomplish. Hayes is the most vocal, but he's not alone. They'll keep pushing, keep trying to undermine you, because your success threatens their worldview about what Marines should be." "I'm aware," she said quietly. "My point is, don't let their prejudice make you feel like you have anything left to prove. You've already proven everything that matters. You're a skilled shooter, a solid tactical operator, and a Marine who performs under pressure. That's all that should matter." Rhiannon felt something tighten in her chest, an unexpected emotion at hearing validation from someone who had started as one of her harshest critics. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you probably realize." After Dunham left, Torres approached and sat down on a concrete barrier beside her. "I overheard what the sergeant said," he admitted. "He's right, about all of it. I owe you an apology, too, for how I acted when you first arrived. I judged you before you ever had a chance to show what you could do." "We all have biases," Rhiannon said. "What matters is whether we're willing to change our minds when the evidence contradicts our assumptions." Torres smiled slightly at having his own words from days earlier quoted back to him. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're on the team. You're one of the best shooters I've ever worked with, and that's not something I say lightly." The acceptance from Dunham and Torres felt significant, but Rhiannon knew the larger battle was far from over. Hayes and his supporters remained openly hostile, and the tension within the unit continued to simmer beneath the surface of professional operations. The intelligence briefing came down from battalion headquarters with unusual urgency. A critical situation was developing in a contested region approximately 40 kilometers from their forward operating base. Enemy forces had taken control of a strategic position overlooking a major supply route, and they were using heavy weapons to interdict coalition convoys attempting to reach isolated outposts. Multiple attempts to dislodge them through indirect fire and airstrikes had failed due to the position's fortification and the surrounding civilian population. Lieutenant Colonel Archer addressed the assembled unit commanders personally, his expression grave. "We need that position neutralized, and we need it done precisely. The enemy is using a fortified compound that's partially integrated with civilian structures. Rules of engagement are absolute. Positive identification required, and zero tolerance for collateral damage. This isn't a job for artillery or air support. This requires surgical precision from our best assets." The mission fell to 3rd Platoon, specifically to Dunham's Scout Sniper team. They gathered in the Tactical Operations Center to review reconnaissance imagery and plan their approach. The target compound was visible in the satellite photos, a multi-story structure with reinforced positions and clear fields of fire covering the highway below. "The problem is range," Dunham said, measuring distances on the map. "The only positions that give us line of sight to the target compound are between 4,000 and 4,500 meters out. That's beyond effective range for standard engagement." Rhiannon studied the imagery carefully, noting the terrain features and calculating angles. "There's an elevated position here," she said, pointing to a ridge system on the map. "If we can establish on this peak, we'd have a clear sight line to the compound. Range would be approximately 4,200 meters." Mather shook his head skeptically. "That's an impossible shot. Even with perfect conditions, the ballistic drop at that range is extreme. Add in wind, heat shimmer, and the fact that we're talking about engaging targets through fortified positions, there's no way to guarantee a hit. Torres looked at Rhiannon thoughtfully. You've made shots at that range before, haven't you? She met his gaze evenly. I've engaged targets at extended ranges in training environments. Combat conditions add variables that make every situation unique. Dunham was silent for a long moment, his expression showing the weight of the decision he was considering. This isn't about proving anything or taking unnecessary risks. If you don't think the shot is feasible, say so now. We'll find another approach. Rhiannon considered the question seriously. The range was extreme, pushing the limits of both equipment and human capability. But she had trained for exactly these scenarios, spent thousands of hours mastering the physics and developing the instincts required for ultra-long-range precision. I believe I can make the shot, Sergeant, but I need optimal conditions and time to properly prepare the position. The mission launched before dawn, the team moving through darkness toward the designated ridgeline. They carried extra ammunition, specialized ballistic calculators, and weather monitoring equipment. The climb to the peak was grueling, the elevation gained significant, and the terrain treacherous in the dark. But they reached the position with enough time to establish before first light. Rhiannon began her preparation with meticulous attention to every detail. She tested multiple shooting positions, measuring angles and calculating sight lines. Torres set up the spotting scope and began documenting atmospheric conditions: temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, wind speed, and direction at multiple elevations. The data would be critical for making accurate ballistic calculations. Target compound is visible, Torres reported as the sun climbed higher. I can see armed personnel moving on the upper levels. They're using the fortified positions to maintain overwatch of the highway. Through her scope, Rhiannon could see the compound clearly despite the extreme range. The fortifications were substantial, with heavy weapons mounted at key positions. The fighters manning them appeared confident, seemingly secure in the belief that they were beyond reach of effective fire. Hayes arrived with the security element, his expression sour as he took in the setup. "You're really going to attempt a shot at this range?" he said, his skepticism obvious. "This is insane. We should be calling in air support, not playing sniper games at impossible distances." "Air support isn't authorized due to the civilian proximity," Dunham replied curtly. "And this is our mission, so either contribute something useful or maintain security quietly." Rhiannon tuned out the exchange, her focus entirely on the preparation. She was building a complete mental model of the shot, factoring in every variable she could measure or estimate. The bullet would travel through multiple atmospheric layers, each with different wind conditions and air density. The Coriolis effect would influence the trajectory over such a long distance. Even the rotation of the Earth became a factor at this range. "We got activity at the compound," Torres said, armed personnel gathering around the primary heavy weapon position. "Looks like they're conducting a shift change or briefing." Rhiannon adjusted her scope, bringing the target area into sharp focus despite the heat shimmer and atmospheric distortion. She could see the fighters clearly now, at least 6 of them clustered around a mounted machine gun position. Intelligence had identified this particular weapon as responsible for multiple coalition casualties over the past week. "Wind is steady at the moment," Torres observed, monitoring the mirage through his spotting scope. "You've got a window here, but it won't last long. Heat's building, and the thermals are going to become more unpredictable." Rhiannon settled into her final shooting position, her body finding the stable platform that would support the extreme precision required. Her breathing slowed to barely perceptible movement, her heart rate dropping as she entered the focus state where calculation and instinct merged into a single unified awareness. "Target is stationary," Torres confirmed. "Range 40 to 112 meters. Wind 2 to 3 miles per hour from the west. Mirage is moderate. You have clearance to engage." The rifle felt like an extension of her being, every component perfectly aligned. She applied the first stage of trigger pressure, feeling the mechanism's break point with intimate familiarity. The world narrowed to nothing but the target, the crosshairs, and the space between heartbeats where the shot would break. The trigger released with glass-like smoothness, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder as the round began its journey across more than 4 kilometers of air. Time seemed to suspend as everyone in the position waited, barely breathing, counting the seconds until the bullet would complete its flight. Through the spotting scope, Torres tracked the bullet's trajectory, watching for the impact. The silence stretched impossibly long, and then suddenly his voice cut through the tension. "Impact," he said, his voice carrying disbelief and awe in equal measure. "Direct hit on the primary target. The weapon position is neutralized." Rhiannon maintained her position, already cycling the bolt and acquiring the next priority target. The fighters at the compound were reacting now, scrambling for cover as they tried to determine the source of the attack. She fired again, this shot directed at a secondary weapons position. Another impossibly long flight, another confirmed impact. The compound below erupted into chaos as enemy fighters scrambled to respond to the threat they couldn't see or locate. Rhiannon fired 3 more shots in rapid succession, each one meticulously calculated and precisely delivered across the impossible distance. Torres confirmed each impact, his voice growing more animated with every hit as he witnessed shooting that defied conventional understanding of what was possible at such ranges. "That's 5 confirmed hits at over 4,000 meters, Torres said, his professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine amazement. "I've never seen anything like this. Not in training, not in combat, not anywhere." Dunham was coordinating with Battalion, providing real-time updates on the engagement. His voice remained steady, but his eyes kept returning to Rhiannon's position with an expression that suggested he was witnessing something he hadn't quite believed possible until this moment. The enemy forces at the compound had finally determined the general direction of the attack and were attempting to return fire, but their weapons lacked the range to pose any threat. Their rounds fell harmlessly hundreds of meters short of the team's position. It was a demonstration of complete tactical superiority, a shooter engaging targets who literally could not fight back against her precision. Hayes stood motionless at his security position, staring at Rhiannon with an expression that cycled between disbelief and something that might have been the first cracks in his hostility. Even he couldn't dismiss or rationalize away what he was witnessing. This wasn't luck or favorable conditions or exaggerated reports. This was undeniable mastery of a craft that few people in the world could claim to possess. "Battalion is reporting that the convoy is moving through the sector now," Dunham announced. "Your suppression has allowed them safe passage. Mission accomplished. Break down the position and prepare for exfiltration." The team collapsed their observation post and began the descent from the ridgeline. The movement back toward their extraction point was conducted with professional efficiency, but the atmosphere within the team had shifted noticeably. Even Hayes remained quiet during the movement, his usual commentary absent. Back at the forward operating base, word of the engagement had spread rapidly through the battalion. Marines who had heard about the 4th centimeter shots wanted to see the shooter who had accomplished them. Rhiannon found herself surrounded by questions and requests for technical details about her equipment and methodology. She answered with patient professionalism, but the attention felt overwhelming after weeks of isolation and hostility. Lieutenant Colonel Archer summoned the entire team to his office for a formal debriefing. He sat behind his desk reviewing the mission reports and drone footage that had captured portions of the engagement. When he finally looked up, his expression was serious but carried an undercurrent of something else. "Corporal Vex, I've been in the Marine Corps for 26 years, Archer said. "I've worked with some of the finest scout snipers this service has ever produced. What you accomplished today ranks among the most impressive feats of marksmanship I've ever witnessed. 5 confirmed hits at ranges exceeding 4,000 meters in combat conditions, with 0 collateral damage. That's exceptional by any standard." "Thank you, sir," Rhiannon replied simply. "But here's what concerns me," Archer continued, leaning forward. "Shooting at that level isn't something you develop through standard training pipelines. That kind of precision at extreme ranges suggests specialized instruction and extensive experience. Your service record shows Scout Sniper School and standard qualifications, but nothing that would explain this level of capability. So I'm going to ask you directly, where did you actually train, and what's your real background? The room went silent. Dunham, Torres, Mathers, and Hayes all turned to look at Rhiannon, curiosity evident on their faces. She had known this moment would eventually arrive, the point where her performance exceeded what could be explained by her official record. "Sir, some aspects of my training and previous deployments are classified," she said carefully. "I'm not authorized to discuss certain operational details without proper clearance protocols." Archer studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I see. And if I were to make inquiries through the appropriate channels about your complete service history, what might I discover?" "You might find that my official record is accurate but incomplete, sir. There are portions of my service that don't appear in standard personnel files for operational security reasons." The implications of that statement hung in the air. Archer's expression suggested he understood exactly what she was saying without her having to spell out explicitly. Special operations, classified missions, training programs that existed in the shadows of the conventional military structure. "Understood," Archer said finally. "I'll make the appropriate inquiries. In the meantime, you're to continue operating with 3rd Platoon as assigned." Dismissed. Outside Archer's office, the team gathered in an uncertain cluster. Torres was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "So you're not just a regular scout sniper, are you? You're something else. Something we don't have clearance to know about." Rhiannon chose her words carefully. "I'm a Marine Corps scout sniper assigned to this battalion. Everything else is need to know, and right now, you don't need to know." Hayes stepped forward, his expression still hostile, but now mixed with grudging respect and frustration. "So this whole time, we've been giving you grief about proving yourself, and you've actually been operating at like 10% of your capability? That's what you're telling us?" "I'm telling you that I was assigned here to do a job, and I've been doing it to the best of my ability within the parameters of this unit's operations," Rhiannon replied. "My previous training and experience are my own business unless command decides otherwise." Dunham intervened before Hayes could respond. "Whatever Corporal Vech's background might be, it doesn't change the fact that she's part of this team and she's been performing her duties exceptionally. We don't need to know her life story to recognize that she's a valuable asset to this platoon." The conversation ended there, but the questions lingered. Rhiannon could see the speculation in their eyes, the mental calculations as they tried to reconcile the shooter they had underestimated with the person who had just demonstrated capabilities that bordered on the superhuman. That night, as she sat alone, cleaning her rifle, Major Reeves approached with a sealed envelope. "Lieutenant Colonel Archer asked me to deliver this to you personally," he said. "It's a priority message from higher command." Rhiannon opened the envelope and read the brief message inside. Her expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle tension that suggested the contents were significant. The message was simple and direct. A 3-star general would be visiting the forward operating base within 72 hours, and he specifically requested to meet with her. The general's name was familiar, someone whose reputation in the special operations community was legendary. If he was coming here personally, it meant her cover was about to be blown wide open. Everything she had tried to keep compartmentalized, all the operational security she had maintained, was about to become public knowledge within the battalion. "Is everything all right, Corporal?" Reeves asked, noting her reaction. "Yes, sir," Rhiannon replied, refolding the message. "Just unexpected news. Nothing I can't handle." But as she returned to her barracks that evening, she knew that the next few days would change everything. The performance she had maintained, the careful balance between demonstrating competence and hiding her true capabilities, was about to collapse. And when it did, everyone would finally understand exactly who she was and what she represented. The 72 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Word had spread through the battalion that a 3-star general was coming to visit, though most Marines assumed it was a routine inspection or command visit. Only a select few knew that the general had specifically requested to meet with one particular corporal, and speculation about the reasons ran rampant through the ranks. Rhiannon spent the time preparing for what she knew was coming. She cleaned and inspected her equipment with extra care, reviewed her after-action reports, and mentally rehearsed how she would handle the inevitable questions and revelations. The pink roses on her rifle stock seemed to mock her with their cheerful defiance, a symbol of the persona she had tried to maintain while keeping her true identity hidden. Hayes found her the day before the general's arrival, his approach more cautious than his usual aggressive confrontations. "I've been asking around," he said without preamble. "Nobody seems to know why a 3-star is coming here specifically to see you. But I talked to a guy in intelligence who got real quiet when I mentioned your name, like he recognized it, but wasn't allowed to say why." Rhiannon continued her equipment maintenance without looking up. "I'm sure the general will explain his reasons when he arrives. Is it true what some people are saying?" Hayes pressed. "That you're some kind of special operations asset? That the whole time you've been here, you've been undercover or on some kind of special assignment?" "I'm a Marine Corps Scout sniper assigned to 3rd Battalion," she replied evenly. "That's all you need to know until someone with appropriate authority tells you otherwise." Hayes stood there for another moment, clearly frustrated by her non-answers, before walking away. But his visit had confirmed what she already suspected. People were starting to piece together the truth, connecting the extraordinary performance with the secretive background and the high-level attention. The general arrived at O'Hydhundred the next morning in a convoy of armored vehicles, accompanied by a small security detail and several staff officers. Lieutenant General Marcus Thorne was a tall man with silver hair and a bearing that commanded instant respect. His uniform displayed multiple combat deployments and decorations that spoke to a career spent at the tip of the spear rather than behind a desk. Lieutenant Colonel Archer met him at the base entrance with full honors, but after the briefest of pleasantries, Thorne cut straight to his purpose. "I need to speak with Corporal Rhiannon Vex immediately," he said. "Is there a secure location we can use?" They were directed to a hardened briefing room normally used for classified intelligence discussions. Rhiannon was escorted there by Major Reeves, who looked intensely curious but knew better than to ask questions. Inside, she found General Thorne waiting along with Archer and 2 staff officers she didn't recognize. "At ease, Corporal," Thorne said, his voice carrying both authority and something that might have been warmth. "Please have a seat. We have quite a bit to discuss." Rhiannon sat in the indicated chair, her posture remaining military correct despite the invitation to relax. She could feel the weight of multiple gazes on her, assessment and curiosity mixing in their expressions. "I'm going to be direct because we don't have time for elaborate protocols," Thorne began. "I've reviewed your recent mission reports from this deployment, and I have to say the performance documented here is extraordinary. 5 confirmed hits at over 4,000 meters, multiple engagements at ranges exceeding 2,800 meters, and consistent accuracy that matches or exceeds anything we've seen from our most elite operators. That kind of capability doesn't develop by accident." He paused, opening a folder that contained what appeared to be classified documents. "Lieutenant Colonel Archer has made inquiries about your complete service history, which triggered certain security protocols that brought your file to my attention. I have the clearances necessary to discuss your actual background, but I want to confirm something first. Your cover here was intentional, wasn't it? You requested assignment to a conventional unit as part of a specific operational requirement." "Yes, sir," Rhiannon confirmed. "I was tasked with evaluating how female Marines with advanced combat skills would be received and integrated into conventional infantry units. The goal was to document the challenges and develop recommendations for future integration policies." Thorne nodded slowly. "And in the process of conducting that evaluation, you've been forced to endure harassment, discrimination, and constant pressure to prove yourself, while simultaneously concealing capabilities that far exceed what would be expected from standard scout sniper. That must have been extraordinarily difficult." "It's been challenging, sir," Rhiannon admitted, "but the mission required authenticity. If I had arrived with my actual credentials and reputation, it would have changed how people interacted with me. The whole point was to document the real experiences that female combat Marines face. One of the staff officers leaned forward. For those of us who don't have access to her complete file, could you provide some context, sir? Thorne looked at Rhiannon, silently asking permission. She nodded slightly, knowing that the moment of revelation had arrived. General, I think Lieutenant Colonel Archer and his staff deserve to know who they've actually been working with. Very well, Thorne agreed. Gentlemen, Corporal Vex is not just a talented scout sniper. She's the Marine Corps' current holder of the longest confirmed combat kill at 60 to 100 meters, achieved during a classified operation 2 years ago. She's completed advanced training with multiple special operations units and has been deployed on some of the most sensitive direct action missions conducted in the past 5 years. In the special operations community, she's known by her call sign, which has become something of a legend in certain circles. Archer's expression had shifted from curiosity to comprehension, and then to something approaching shock. He looked at Rhiannon with new eyes, seeing past the corporal's insignia to the operator beneath. What's your call sign? He asked quietly. Rhiannon met his gaze steadily, knowing that once she spoke the name, everything would change. The anonymity she had maintained, the careful separation between her classified work and her conventional assignments, would evaporate. But the time for secrets had passed. Spectre 6, she said simply. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the staff officers who hadn't known her identity clearly recognized the call sign. In special operations circles, Spectre 6 was a ghost story, a shooter whose capabilities seemed to exist at the edge of what was physically possible. There were rumors about impossible shots, about targets eliminated from distances that defied belief, about a female operator who had become one of the most lethal precision marksmen in American military history. Lieutenant Colonel Archer sat back in his chair, his mind clearly racing as he reassessed every interaction, every mission, every moment since Rhiannon had arrived at his battalion. You've been operating at maybe 20% capacity, he said finally. Everything you've accomplished here, all the shots that we thought were extraordinary, those are you working within the limitations of what a conventional scout sniper might achieve. More or less, sir, Rhiannon confirmed. My mission parameters required me to perform well enough to document the integration challenges, but not so exceptionally that it would compromise my cover or make the evaluation inauthentic. Thorne stood, his expression becoming more serious. Which brings me to why I'm here today. The situation has developed beyond the scope of your original evaluation mission. We have intelligence indicating that a high-value target is moving through this region within the next 48 hours. The engagement parameters for neutralizing this target exceed the capabilities of standard sniper teams. We need Spectre 6, not Corporal Vex, operating under artificial constraints. I'm here to officially terminate your evaluation mission and activate you for a critical direct action operation. The briefing that followed was conducted with a level of security and precision that marked it as something far beyond routine operations. General Thorne dismissed all personnel except Lieutenant Colonel Archer, Major Reeves, and Sergeant Dunham, who had been summoned specifically for his role as Rhiannon's team leader. The room was swept for electronic surveillance before Thorne began laying out the mission parameters. Intelligence has identified a high-value target designated Crimson 7, Thorne explained, pulling up satellite imagery on the briefing room's display. This individual is responsible for coordinating weapons transfers that have resulted in significant coalition casualties across 3 operational theaters. He's been on our priority target list for 18 months, but he's proven exceptionally difficult to locate and engage. The images showed a fortified compound in mountainous terrain, the structures built into the natural rock formations for additional protection. Multiple layers of security were visible in the reconnaissance photos: guards, barriers, observation posts. We've confirmed he'll be at this location for a brief window, approximately 6 hours, to meet with regional commanders, Thorne continued. The compound's location makes conventional assault extremely difficult, and the surrounding civilian population rules out airstrikes. We need a precision engagement from extreme range. The only viable shooting position we've identified is here. He indicated a mountain peak on the map, and Dunham immediately saw the problem. That's nearly 6,000 meters from the target compound, he said, his voice reflecting his understanding of what was being asked. That's beyond anything we've attempted, even with Corporal Vex capabilities. 60 to 100 meters, to be precise, Thorne corrected, which happens to be exactly the range at which Spectre 6 achieved her record engagement during Operation Silent Ridge 2 years ago. The terrain, atmospheric conditions, and tactical parameters are similar. If anyone can make this shot, it's her. All eyes turned to Rhiannon. She studied the imagery and topographical data with clinical precision, her mind already running through the calculations. The range was extreme, even by her standards, requiring not just skill but optimal environmental conditions and meticulous preparation. But she had done it before, and she could feel the familiar pull of the challenge. "I'll need specialized ammunition," she said finally. Match-grade rounds specifically prepared for ultra-long-range ballistics. Standard issue won't maintain sufficient stability over that distance. I'll also need advanced meteorological equipment and at least 12 hours on-site to properly prepare the shooting position. All of that can be arranged, Thorne confirmed. What else? A spotter with experience at these ranges, someone who understands the unique requirements of ultra-long-range ballistics. And complete operational control once we're in position. No command interference during the actual engagement. Thorne nodded. "Sergeant Dunham, you'll accompany her as part of the support element, but I'm bringing in Chief Warrant Officer Nakamura from the Special Operations Command as her spotter. He's worked with Spectre 6 on previous operations and understands her methodology." Dunham looked at Rhiannon with an expression that mixed respect and something approaching awe. "I'd like to be there to observe, sir, to see how an operation like this is actually conducted at the highest level." "That's acceptable," Thorne agreed. "You'll be part of the security element along with 2 other Marines from your team. This operation is classified at the highest level. Nothing about Spectre 6 identity or capabilities leaves this room without my express authorization. Is that understood by everyone present?" The assembled officers and NCOs confirmed their understanding. The weight of the classification was clear. This wasn't just operational security. It was protecting one of the military's most valuable and secretive assets. The mission team assembled 12 hours later under cover of darkness. Chief Warrant Officer Nakamura was a compact man in his 40s with calm eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who had operated at the highest levels for decades. He greeted Rhiannon with a simple nod and a brief smile. "Good to work with you again, Spectre 6, he said. "I brought the specialized ammunition you requested. Match-grade 338 Lapua, prepared specifically for extreme range. I also have the meteorological suite and ballistic computers." Torres and Mathers had been selected as the security element alongside Dunham, both having proven their reliability during previous operations. When they saw Nakamura's specialized equipment and heard Rhiannon addressed by her call sign, the full reality of who they had been working with finally seemed to settle on them completely. The insertion was conducted by helicopter to a remote landing zone, followed by a 6-kilometer movement through mountainous terrain to reach the designated shooting position. The movement was conducted in complete silence, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous ground. Rhiannon moved with practiced efficiency, her body adapted to the extreme physical demands of special operations. They reached the position 4 hours before dawn and immediately began the painstaking process of establishing the ultimate shooting platform. Nakamura set up the meteorological equipment, measuring atmospheric conditions at multiple elevations. Rhiannon prepared her rifle with ritualistic care, checking every component and making minute adjustments based on the environmental data. As the sun began to rise, they could see the target compound clearly through their optics. The distance was almost incomprehensible, the target appearing as tiny details even through the high-powered scope. Heat shimmer would become a significant factor as the day progressed, adding another layer of complexity to the already impossible shot. Nakamura began the detailed environmental analysis, calling out data that would feed into Rhiannon's calculations. Temperature gradient shows significant thermal layering between our position and the target. Wind is variable, 3 to 7 miles per hour at our elevation, but the upper air currents are showing crosswinds up to 12 miles per hour. We'll need to time the shot during a period of atmospheric stability. Dunham watched the preparation with fascination. This was operational art at its highest level, the convergence of technology, training, and human capability pushing against the absolute limits of what was possible. Torres and Mathers maintained security, but couldn't help glancing back at the shooting position, drawn by the historic nature of what they were witnessing. Target is arriving at the compound, Nakamura announced, tracking movement through his spotting scope. Multiple vehicles, heavy security presence. Stand by for positive identification. Through her scope, Rhiannon could see the vehicles arriving and armed personnel securing the perimeter. Then a figure emerged from the lead vehicle, his bearing and the attention paid to him by the security detail marking him as someone significant. Nakamura began the identification process, comparing the figure's appearance against known intelligence imagery. Positive identification on Crimson 7, he confirmed. Target is moving toward the compound's main structure. We have approximately 10 minutes before he'll be inside and out of sight. Rhiannon settled into her final shooting position, her body becoming absolutely still as she entered the focused state that had made her legendary. The rifle was an extension of her will, every component calibrated and aligned toward this single purpose. She began her final calculations, integrating all the environmental data into a comprehensive ballistic solution. Wind is stabilizing, Nakamura said quietly. Thermal conditions are optimal. You have a 3-minute window of ideal shooting conditions starting now. Rhiannon's breathing slowed to almost nothing. The world contracted to nothing but the target, the crosshairs, and the vast expanse of air between them. She could feel the wind on her face, hear the distant sounds of the compound far below, sense the perfect moment approaching like a wave building toward shore. The shot broke with perfect clarity, the rifle's report echoing across the mountainous terrain as the bullet began its journey through more than 6 kilometers of air. Rhiannon maintained absolute stillness through the follow-through, her scope remaining locked on the target as the seconds stretched into eternity. The bullet traveled through multiple atmospheric layers, each one affecting its trajectory in ways that required not just calculation, but instinctive understanding developed through thousands of hours of practice. Time seemed suspended. Nakamura tracked the bullet's path through his spotting scope, his breathing as controlled as Rhiannon's. Dunham, Torres, and Mathers watched in absolute silence, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be talked about in hushed tones for decades to come. The distance was so extreme that the bullet's flight time approached 7 seconds, an impossibly long interval where 1,000 variables could shift the outcome. Impact, Nakamura said finally, his voice carrying quiet triumph. Direct hit. Target is down. Crimson 7 is neutralized. Through her scope, Rhiannon could see the chaos erupting at the compound as security personnel rushed to respond. But the target was down, the mission accomplished with a single shot that had traveled further than most people could even see with the naked eye. She cycled the bolt and cleared her rifle, the mechanical action providing a sense of completion to the engagement. Pack up, Nakamura ordered. We need to be off this peak in 15 minutes. They'll be searching for our position. The exfiltration was conducted with the same professional efficiency as their insertion, the team moving rapidly through the terrain toward their extraction point. Behind them, they could hear helicopters beginning to search the mountains, but the team was already kilometers away from their shooting position, disappearing into the landscape like the ghost their call sign suggested. The flight back to the forward operating base was quiet, each member of the team processing what they had witnessed in their own way. Dunham kept looking at Rhiannon with an expression that suggested he was still reconciling the corporal he thought he knew with the operator she actually was. Torres and Mathers seemed equally stunned, their previous skepticism completely obliterated by the undeniable reality of what they had just observed. General Thorne was waiting when they landed, along with Lieutenant Colonel Archer and a small group of senior officers. The debriefing was brief and focused, confirming the mission's success and documenting the engagement for the classified after-action report. When it concluded, Thorne addressed Rhiannon directly. "That was exceptional work, Spectre 6. The President will be briefed on this operation personally, and your actions today have eliminated a threat responsible for significant American casualties. The nation owes you a debt of gratitude, even if most people will never know what you accomplished." "Just doing my job, sir," Rhiannon replied simply. Thorne smiled slightly. "You say that, but there are perhaps 5 people on the planet who could have made that shot. Your capabilities represent a strategic asset of the highest value. Which brings me to your next assignment. Your evaluation mission here is complete, and the data you've gathered will be invaluable for future integration policies. But I want you back in Special Operations Command, where those capabilities can be fully utilized." Before she could respond, Lieutenant Colonel Archer stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, I'd like to make a request. I understand that Spectre 6 skills are needed at the highest levels, but her presence here, even temporarily, has had a significant impact on this battalion. I'd ask that before she transfers, we be allowed to hold a formation so that the Marines who worked with her can understand what they were actually part of." Thorne considered the request before nodding. "That's acceptable, but the specific details of today's mission remain classified. You can acknowledge her identity and general capabilities, but nothing about the range or target of this specific engagement." The formation was called for that evening. The entire battalion assembled in dress uniforms despite the operational environment. Word had spread that something significant was happening, and the Marines gathered with a mixture of curiosity and speculation. Hayes stood in formation with his platoon, his expression uncertain as he tried to understand what was about to be revealed. Lieutenant Colonel Archer stood before the assembled battalion with General Thorne beside him. His voice carried across the formation with clarity and authority. "Marines, I'm going to tell you about someone who has been serving among you for the past several months. Someone who endured harassment, discrimination, and constant pressure to prove herself while concealing capabilities that far exceed anything you've witnessed. Corporal Rhiannon Vex is not just a talented scout sniper. She is one of the most elite precision marksmen in American military history, operating under the call sign Spectre 6. The murmur that rippled through the formation was immediate. Many had heard rumors about the call sign, whispered stories about impossible shots, and legendary operations. Now they were being told that the female Marine with the pink rose-covered rifle, the one some of them had mocked and dismissed, was that legend made flesh. Archer continued, "Spectre 6 holds the record for the longest confirmed combat kill in Marine Corps history. She has completed missions that will remain classified for decades, and she volunteered to serve with this battalion, knowing she would face hostility and skepticism as part of an evaluation to help future female Marines integrate into combat roles. Every shot she took, every mission she completed with 3rd Platoon, was conducted while operating under artificial constraints to maintain her cover. What you witnessed was perhaps 20% of her actual capability." General Thorne stepped forward. "I've authorized this disclosure because every Marine here deserves to know that they serve alongside one of the finest warriors this nation has ever produced. Spectre 6 actions today eliminated a high-value target and saved countless American lives. Her service with this battalion has been exemplary, and her contributions to our understanding of integration challenges will benefit the Marine Corps for years to come." The formation was dismissed, and immediately Marines began approaching Rhiannon, their expressions ranging from awe to embarrassment. Those who had supported her seemed vindicated, while those who had opposed her struggled to process the revelation. Hayes approached last, his face showing the internal conflict of someone whose worldview had been completely shattered. "I don't know what to say," he admitted quietly. "I spent months trying to undermine you, spreading rumors, making your life miserable. And the whole time, you were someone who could have ended my career with a single complaint to command. Why didn't you?" Rhiannon met his eyes steadily. "Because the point of my mission was to document the real experiences female Marines face. If I had used my actual rank or reputation to shield myself, it would have defeated the purpose. You and others like you revealed truths about the integration challenges that need to be addressed. That data is more valuable than my personal comfort. Hayes nodded slowly, something like respect finally appearing in his expression. For what it's worth, I was wrong. About everything. And I'm sorry. Torres and Mathers approached together, both wearing expressions of sheepish admiration. We've been bragging to everyone that we worked with Spectre 6, Torres said, telling them about the missions we ran together. Is that going to get us in trouble? Rhiannon smiled slightly. As long as you don't discuss classified details, I think you'll be fine. You both performed well. You should be proud of the work we did together. Dunham was the last to approach, his weathered face showing genuine respect. I've been thinking about everything that happened since you arrived, he said. All the times I doubted you, all the challenges I threw you hoping you'd fail. You handled every one of them with professionalism and patience, even though you could have crushed any of us if you'd wanted to. That takes a special kind of character. You gave me the opportunity to prove myself on my own terms, Rhiannon replied. That's all I ever wanted. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character, or if you've witnessed similar situations where someone's true capabilities surprised everyone. Your thoughts and experiences matter to us. As the sun set over the forward operating base, Rhiannon stood alone with her rifle case, the pink roses still visible despite the wear and dust of combat operations. Tomorrow she would transfer back to Special Operations Command, returning to the classified world where her capabilities could be fully utilized. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission had been completed successfully on every level. The evaluation data gathered, the high-value target eliminated, and perhaps most importantly, minds changed about what female Marines could accomplish when given the opportunity to prove themselves. The legend of Spectre 6 would continue to grow in the years ahead, whispered stories of impossible shots and extraordinary operations. But for those Marines who had served with Corporal Rhiannon Vex, the legend would always be grounded in the memory of a fellow warrior who had walked among them, endured their hostility with grace, and ultimately shown them that capability and character transcended every assumption they had made about who belonged on the battlefield.